What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Hawks Film Room podcast. The podcast is now on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, so make sure to check it out there. Links are in the description if you're watching on YouTube. Add the show, give it a 5-star rating, comment on the show, whatever feedback you guys may have for me. Just want to keep getting better, just like the Hawks are, because the Hawks just pulled off a really impressive win in the Garden behind a massive third quarter run. Hawks were down 10. The chance that happened in the Garden started happening, and then Trae Young sort of went on a flurry. The Hawks defense played really, really well at a high level, and so I had to go on and bring back Geoff from our first Knicks episode so we could talk about the game and some larger picture questions about the Knicks. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I just wanted to say, for those who listen, if you're regular listeners, if you're first-time listeners, Dave does a great job here. He sent me this both times. He sent me this really long list of like potential topics with details, stuff I've never gotten. I've been on a number of shows, and if you're not following this is going to get big. So just make sure you subscribe because he does a great job here.
I appreciate that. And I have to go into detail because I know you know the game, so I want to make sure that we can touch on as many topics as in depth as we can. And so just to kick it off, I'm gonna highlight a couple of Hawks that there's one Hawk in particular who stood out to me, and then you'll highlight a Nick. Jalen Johnson, man, it's continuously getting more and more impressive, but on honestly one of the biggest stages of his career. Like he did play playoff minutes, of course, against the Celtics, and then some play-in game minutes as well. But in the Garden, national television, he started off pretty slow, especially in the first half. Looked a little bit frazzled, which he's done at points throughout the season, especially starting games against very aggressive teams that can sort of pressure him when he's dribbling the ball. First quarter, he was 2 for 9. He finished the half 2 for 11, and then he just really turned up in the third quarter, 4 or 5 from the field, and then ended up finishing with 15 in the second half and finishing the game with 21 points, 15 rebounds, 7 assists. I think he is such a presence athletically, and then especially on the glass, I think he made a huge, huge difference. A number of contested rebounds, and then of course he can grab and push it. And I think he's such a dynamic player, and I love the way that they've empowered him, to grab and go in transition, and then he's just as much of a threat as a passer now as he is as a scorer. So I think without his physicality and then just in general his impact on the game, the Hawks don't get out of MSG with the win. And then, of course, defensively, he was in the passing lanes. He's pretty active around the rim. So overall, very, very impressive game from him, especially because his shot wasn't falling, especially from the three-point line. He took care of the ball, was really good on the glass, found his guys. So overall, very, very impressed with Jalen Johnson last night.
Yeah, you said a number of things there that just really are on the nose with Johnson that stand out. Johnson. The thing that I noticed is, without DeJounte Murray, they trade DeJounte Murray this offseason. They really lean into this more heliocentric offense around Trae Young. They don't really have much initiation outside of Trae Young. Naturally, this falls to Jalen Johnson as the number 2 option. You expect a 23-year-old with a much bigger burden on his shoulders for it to go down before it goes up. That's usually the normal trajectory. But he's having a career best offensive season. Somehow his defensive impact has actually increased, which again is unique for a 23-year-old who's taking on a bigger offensive burden. He's being assisted as infrequently as he's ever been assisted. He's just assisted on just over 68% of his shots, which is a career low. He's being assisted on fewer threes, fewer rim attempts, and yet he has a career high rim efficiency, and his three-point percentage is maintained. And the good thing about his three-point percentage is it's maintained, but it's not so high that you're like, oh, that's carrying that's carrying most of his offensive impact. No, it's just like he can do this. He's a 35% free three-point shooter. He can do that. Incredibly impressive player on both ends, and he's fits really well with Trae Young, and he's really necessary next to Trae Young because Trae Young needs someone to step in when, he can't run the offense for whatever, when he's not on the court or tired, whatever the case may be. Jalen Johnson can do that, but he doesn't require the ball so much that he can't help in other ways. So he's kind of the perfect fit next to Trae Young, and last night was another incredibly impressive performance from him.
Yeah, I agree on all those facets for sure. He's become so much more confident with the ball in his hands, whether he's attacking downhill in transition or in half court. There's still moments where I want him, just to remember that he's 6'8" and incredibly athletic. But there's also times where he still needs to find that balance between attacking the rim blindly and then sort of keeping his head up. He had about 2 or 3 moments against you guys where he's good. He's good for one of these a game where he's going to put his head down and try to attack the rim in transition and turn the ball over when there's better options. So it's like I love the aggressiveness. I love the way that he's sort of become a lot more resilient in terms of his offensive mentality. But the great thing is like he still has so much room to grow, and that's why I think I'm so excited to see what he can finally be when he reaches that point. But I'd love to hear what Knicks stood out to you.
Do I have to say it, Nick? I don't like. We can just move on. What?
Yeah,
What?
if you want to.
I guess Towns. I don't know. I didn't think anyone really played all that well last night. I thought some Knicks were really. Oh, you know what? I liked how Josh Hart played, and after all the people who listen to this won't care, won't know about this, but I have basically been the Jon Snow GIF fighting off all of Knicks Twitter and all of Knicks fans, and Josh Hart is the subject because I don't think he should be the starting. I don't think he should be in the starting lineup. Not because I don't think he's one of the Knicks 5 best players. I think he is one of the Knicks 5 best players. I just think the Knicks rotation works a lot smoother if he comes off the bench. I still want him playing 30 minutes a game, but I think as people who watch Knicks games see, with Josh Hart in the starting lineup, all 3 of their best wings are starting. And what that's turned into is Tibbs just being like, oh, well, I have to play them all the time. And they're 3 of the top 4 minutes leaders in the entire NBA. And I don't know how good that is long term, but that's a different subject. I thought Hart played well last night. I don't think anybody's defense was like great, but the Hawks scored 108 points, and McCall, Brunson, and Towns, it's not like they're world beaters defensively right now. OG can't do it all by himself, so I thought Hart did a lot of good things defensively last night, even if there were some slip-ups. 21 points on 8 of 12. I thought he hit a couple of huge threes that, like, if the Knicks came back and won at the end, you would have pointed to and been like, that's the moment they turned the game around. They didn't end up doing that. And then most importantly, like, this isn't analytical. If you came here to listen to me spew about analytics, there was just like, it felt like he was trying to drag the team through the mud. Like every play midway through that fourth quarter on both ends, he was there. He was fighting. And I just appreciate about that because I just appreciated that about him because it really, really felt like a lifeless team last night. And he was just trying to single-handedly do it. So I don't know why I thought anybody else. He's the guy I'm going to shout out.
Yeah, for sure. I'd agree with that. Did seem like the energy kind of got sucked out the arena, especially in the third quarter. And I think, it wasn't necessarily the Hawks offensive, although they were clicking. It was more so the defense. Like it was more like a defensive grift that was just like sort of just suffocated everything that New York was doing. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the episode. So I think for me, I probably would have went Josh Hart as well. I thought Cat was pretty decent on the glass, of course, 19 rebounds. I do think that his paint defense, which again we'll talk about a little bit more in depth a little bit later on, I was impressed in the first half, but there were still moments where he just conceded too many easy looks, and then that sort of was exacerbated in the second half. But I think I'd have to probably go Mikal just because I thought he was taking advantage of his matchup earlier in the game. It seemed like they went away from it a little bit, but I think he was doing a pretty capable job of being that third scorer for New York. And they probably going to have to lean into that a little bit more against teams like Atlanta, where they can put a lot of pressure on Jalen Brunson, and so they can sort of free him up in different ways. So again, we'll talk about that a little bit later in the episode, but I think Mikal's sort of ability to be a release valve early in the game was pretty important. I was surprised they didn't keep going to it. But yeah.
Yeah, Mikal is weird right now because he's been shooting it better lately, but the thing is they signed him this offseason to be a facsimile, or excuse me, they traded for him this offseason to be a facsimile of Julius Randle as a second initiator, right, and to form this wing trio that wouldn't let opposing ball handlers into the paint with Josh Hart and with OG Anunoby, because they knew that with Towns, or even if they went small with Julius Randle before they got Towns, they knew that the rim protection wasn't going to be as good as it was without Isaiah Hartenstein, especially after they lost Hartenstein.
Right.
And Bridges hasn't lived up to either billing. They don't run any offense through him, as you just alluded to. and his point of attack defense has been woeful. It's just, if Hawks fans, this is your second time watching the Knicks, what you saw last night with Trae Young just continuously getting into the teeth of the defense and forcing help, especially after the Knicks overreacted, which we'll talk about later, overreacted to a few buckets from Trae Young. This is what Knicks fans have been dealing with all season. Bridges doesn't really stay in front of anyone. He got absolutely dusted by Grady Dick, on a pure ISO the other night in a game the Knicks should have lost. Like, it was a very weird vibe after that Raptors-Knicks game in Knicks-verse. The NBA game report came out, which is one of my favorite Twitter accounts because it basically it posts like adjusted scores or like expected scores. And the final expected score of that game was like Raptors 117, Knicks 105. And the Knicks ended up winning. And, 99% of Knicks fans were like, oh, well, it's good that they learn how to win close games. These are battles that will matter down the line. And to me, it was like, man, they just lost like by double-digit expected points to one of the worst teams in the league that was playing without its two best players. That's a way worse thing than anything good we can take from this. And nobody wanted to hear it, and then it just carried over to this Hawks game. You listen to High Hand Theory from last week about the Hawks episode. We're going to talk about this later. We both, Akshay and I, expected the Knicks to win. They were pretty big favorites in this game. We had reasons for this, but make no mistake, this is a Knicks team. This is a Knicks team with problems right now.
Yeah, and so I think that goes into the first question that I had for you. And so I saw your co-host say that he thinks the Knicks have a very big matchup advantage against the Hawks. And I think that this is pretty interesting because depending on what perspective you take, I feel like I could argue that in some ways the Hawks have a matchup advantage against New York. Just to give some context on that, I mean, obviously the Hawks are a bigger team. You can see that with the way they dominate on the glass. They're top 10 in free throw rate. They're a little bit more physical, even if you do have guys like Josh Hart, Jalen Brunson, who create and embrace a lot of contact. I think Dyson has to be one of the best Brunson defenders in the NBA, and he makes them work. The Hawks are really good at collapsing the paint on Brunson and then getting back out. And then, of course, they can also attack Cat in the paint. But then I saw one of the biggest points that I saw your co-host make, XJ, and then just in general, like a ongoing theme for the Hawks is that New York is the best three-point shooting team in the league. Pretty much, I think they're maybe top 5 or top 7 in volume. I can't remember exactly, but they're one of the best percentage-wise. And
yeah, they're the best percentage-wise, and then they're like middle of the road to slightly above average in volume.
Okay. And the Hawks allow the second highest frequency of three-point attempts and the highest three-point percentage. And then, of course, the Knicks starting lineup doesn't have someone we can hide on Trae. Anyone we put them on, they're going to have an advantage on just by virtue of their size or their strength, right? So I definitely could see it from that perspective, but I'm curious on how you feel about the matchup in its totality across these two teams. And do you think that do the Knicks really have a matchup advantage against the Hawks?
Yeah, so matchup advantage is weird. I think the Knicks I still think the Knicks are the better team, which I'm sure will make your audience super happy to hear. Like, I think that if the Knicks played again, whether it's in Atlanta or New York, they'll be favorites. And look, maybe they'll lose again and I'll look silly, but maybe it is just a matchup thing. But into the points that you're getting into, I think what XJ was specifically leaning on was the 3-point attempts and what was the Knicks 3-point offense against the Hawks 3-point defense, and that's a matchup to exploit. The funny thing about that is, and I pointed this out on the show, the Knicks were 22 of 47 from 3 in the first game they played and still lost. So they needed to be able to do more outside of just creating good threes, because there was already a game where they created a bunch of good threes and they didn't win that game. So matchup advantage is tricky. If you gave them equal talent and the profiles were the same, I actually think I agree with you that you could argue that the Hawks actually have a profile matchup advantage just due to the size and the way they attack the Knicks. And then Dyson Daniels, as you alluded to, is a very, very clear block of the Knicks' best weapon. And here's the thing. XJ and I can argue until the end of the earth that, well, if the Knicks played optimally and they did what any reasonable person would do, which is not let Dyson Daniels be in the primary action 90% of the time, then maybe they would have a matchup advantage. But guess what? The coach is a part of the matchup. Quinn Snyder versus Tom Thibodeau is a part of the chess match. And if Tom Thibodeau is going to say, I'm only comfortable with Jalen Brunson with the ball in his hands, I need him to run offense, whether XJ and I think that's wrong or not doesn't matter. That's what we have to analyze based on what is happening. And that's clearly how the Knicks want to run their offense. And if that's how the Knicks want to run their offense, the Hawks clearly have a matchup advantage in that regard because they have the best Jalen Brunson stopper. So again, it's a really nuanced discussion, and it's really interesting because I think XJ's perspective, and he's incredibly smart, and I hope there are, enough open-minded people who will get past the like rah Hawks won, Knicks lose. We're actively trying to analyze this as objectively as we can. I think his perspective is more theoretical and more about, all right, here's the profiles of the teams. If both teams are playing up to their ceiling, the Knicks have more things to exploit from Atlanta than Atlanta has to exploit of the Knicks. And I think that's where he's coming from.
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely makes sense. And I think, again, some Hawks fans may take that as a shot at the team, or that the Knicks have a clear advantage. But when you break it down in that way, I would definitely agree. And I think it's interesting because I saw a couple of Knicks fans like, just stop attacking Brunson, please. I mean, stop attacking Dyson Daniels, like keep him out of the action. Like you have to sort of treat him like a shutdown corner, where it's like it makes more sense offensively to just completely stay away from even involving him in any action. And I think that is such, like, I think you tweeted, or maybe it was actually, it was like, it's such a big value add for the Hawks because they can build the crux of their defense around the fact that they can leave Dyson one-on-one against Jalen Brunson. And very, very few teams can do that reliably. So a massive sort of advantage that the Hawks just can't take for granted because, again, we didn't have anyone like this for a very, very, very long time. And so I wanted to also ask, just in general, do you think, or first off, here's some of the caveat from like the three-point shooting defense stuff. That was something I've been tracking throughout the season. We were getting outscored at historic amounts from the three-point line. We had teams like Brooklyn and Washington shooting the lights out. And so some of that is some early season stuff. At the time that we first talked, teams were shooting 41% on above the break threes against the Hawks. They're now shooting about 38%. We had worse defensive personnel playing, and the Hawks have done a pretty good job limiting corner threes, but they're still the highest frequency or the second highest frequency of above the break. And you have teams still shooting 38.4% on above the break threes, which is a full 3 percentage points above league average. So it has calmed down a good amount from the last time they matched up versus New York. But this team also is second in points in the paint differential. So where they get outscored from the three-point line, they sort of make it up in the paint. That's how they've been playing throughout the season. And so if you do allow them to get to the paint, you have to shoot it really, really well from three to make up that gap because they are one of the leading scorers in the paint. So I think the overall three-point frequency stuff should normalize a little bit more. Like I still think they are sort of intentionally walling off the paint and then sort of trusting that guys can get out and recover. But I think in general, from a schematic perspective, the Knicks offense is ridiculous. Like this is the best offense in the NBA. And this is also, like, last season, we saw a lot of inflation on offensive rating. League average offensive rating, I think, was 117 for a long time. It's calmed down a lot. Like, now it's about 113. And so the Knicks are a full 10 points better than league average from an offensive perspective. And when they played Atlanta last night, they had their worst offensive performance of the season. They scored just 101 points per 100 possessions, which, again, this is the best offense in the NBA. And they never have performances this anemic. Even when they lost to Utah, they still scored the ball at a higher level than they did last night. And I think that starts with Jalen Brunson, and I think that starts with Dyson Daniels. So before we hop into some film, I just wanted to ask you, do you think there's a better Brunson defender besides Dyson Daniels?
No, I think he's the best Brunson defender in the NBA, I'd imagine. I'd have to go through the teams in my head, but there are some other players who give Brunson a hard time. A surprising one that you wouldn't expect, but is Kelly Oubre. Nick Nurse always coaches really physical teams, and Nick Sixers games often end up being physical, especially if you have a referee crew like last night that will let both teams play physical, which is a good thing. I think it's a good thing. I think it's funny that Knicks fans pride themselves on being this like blue collar lunch pail fan base, and then after every game there's discussion about the referees, And it's like, and Trae Young is seen as this always looking for fouls, soft guy. And, he shot 6 free throws or whatever last night, and the Knicks are trying to write letters to the league office. It's like, let's just play basketball here.
Yeah,
I think Kelly Oubre really gets physical with Brunson. And Brunson has had plenty of success against Philadelphia. This isn't about the results of what Brunson's done against Philadelphia, but I think
mhm,
Oubre plays him really hard, but not as well as Dyson Daniels. And I also just think that what was interesting about last night is before this Hawks game, almost every single one of the Knicks' bad offensive performances came against teams that were just super switch heavy. They were just switching everything and living with ridiculous mismatches because they knew the Knicks wouldn't exploit them. Like that 86-85 game against the Hornets. They had Towns on this G League point guard, and they just didn't find him ever because that's just the Knicks just don't do that. Like they don't have Towns go seal the block with a point guard and force help or anything. It's very odd, and it's an adjustment they have to make. Last night was, I'm not saying the Hawks never switched, but it was more on the back of Dyson Daniels taking away the head of the snake, and that just sort of having a trickle down effect the rest of the way.
for sure. I'm just honestly just looking at the film, watching the game. I was just really impressed with the way that they sort of cluttered his passing lanes, and I think that I don't know if you see teams do this as frequently. Again, like I don't watch the Knicks as much as you do, but I thought this was a really good play from them. I think it should be this one. Um, so here's an example of what like a quick show and recovery looked like from the Hawks last night. So they have Trae showing, and then Dyson was going to get back into the play. But watch how quickly the Hawks shrink the floor. And so a lot of this is personnel based as well. Like your best shooter on the probably is OG, but DeAndre Hunter's still in position to make a contest, and then Precious Achiuwa isn't. He's also kind of like contributing to the lack of spacing here, and Brunson isn't checking the backside. There's like a lot of things here that I think Brunson maybe could have diagnosed better. But just look at how like when you freeze it here, there's a ton of space, a lot of space for him to exploit, and then within a second, it's like completely closed down, and he still doesn't feel like he can make these passes because of Dyson Daniels' presence. So I thought they showed him a lot of bodies and just made it very tough. And they wanted the ball in, the guys who aren't as capable at creating their own offense, like whether it's OG or Mikal Bridges, like those are the guys they want to take in those shots in the shot clock. And then just looking at like a lot of his misses too. To your point, it was a lot of Dyson just one-on-one against him, forcing him into these tough looks, getting good contests, working around screens and getting in front of him. Like I actually think that Dyson's screen navigation could be better. Like, and that's the crazy thing. Like when I watch, even like for example, I think Deuce is really good at getting around screens. Dyson is still able to get back in the plays like just at a really high level. And then when they did switch, they were able to show help on drives and then just make it a little bit tougher so you can't get that extra step to the paint, and it's a tougher floater. So I thought they mixed it up a lot, honestly, and they put a lot of different sort of ways to try and show him different looks. Even I thought Trae was very aggressive with the way that he tried to stun at him, and so by the time Dyson's able to get back in front of the ball, he doesn't have that initial advantage from getting downhill on this handoff. There's a lot of things I really liked from what the Hawks did, but I think just in general, you want to make guys work when they're on the ball. The Hawks have never been able to make guys work on the ball. It's been very, very easy for guards for a long time. And I thought just in general, I felt like they made it incredibly, like a lot of his shots are just step backs or pull ups. Like there's no easy looks in these misses that you watch. Like he's not missing easy open shots. And you can't give Brunson easy open shots because then he gets in a rhythm, then he can get into his in between game. So I thought just a phenomenal defensive performance in general. Here, Dyson gets around the screen. He's still fully in the play, and they're still showing help. They got Jalen Johnson splitting too, and Brunson's off balance because of the way that Dyson was able to stand them up. So I really felt like just Dyson didn't need help from anyone, which prevents the ball from rotating. The Knicks are, I believe, 10. I think you're 6-1 when Brunson takes less than 14 shots, and then 3-5 when he takes more than 20. So I think this team is still at its best when he's like a primary playmaker, just because of all the offensive talent. And if he does have that if he's not being relied upon for his scoring, then that means that he's facilitating a lot for everyone else. And so I was curious, you said that you felt like a lot of the Knicks' struggles this season came against switching defenses. So are there any particular similarities in the defensive approach between like their more apathetic offensive performances? So for example, that Utah game, Charlotte in that 99-98 win, and then versus Houston and Cleveland.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just the switching defense, honestly. It's just, and the thing it has in common with the Hawks' performance last night is that it doesn't let the Knicks create advantages. Like, even though the Hawks aren't switching everything the way that Charlotte and Cleveland, or I'm going to put the Utah one aside. That was just 3-point nonsense. That was, teams have bad losses like that all the time. That's just the Jazz were hot from three is,
Right.
we talked about last time I was on your show, there were a lot of things the Knicks could learn from that loss to Atlanta. I don't know if one of the takeaways was they needed guard Zachary Risachet. He was 6 of 10 from three, and I don't know if he's made 6 threes since that game. I think he's made like 13 or something like that. But I don't mean that dismissively. I'm just saying that sometimes guys have good shooting games. That's going to happen. But what a switch heavy defense and having Dyson Daniels on your team does for you, it basically accomplishes the same thing, which is that Jalen Brunson, their primary initiator, has to create his advantages in one-on-one situations. It's not the second you are in drop coverage and you send two to the ball unnecessarily, that starts the domino effect. It gives the Knicks an advantage that they otherwise wouldn't have. And they're really, really good at taking advantage of those situations.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's Towns catching and going and kicking out, whether it's OG Anunoby or Bridges hitting a three, or Hart, catching and going, or sometimes hitting a three, they have a ton of options once the first domino falls. What a switch-heavy scheme accomplishes and what Dyson Daniels and your team accomplishes is it disallows that first domino from falling and puts a lot of pressure on Jalen Brunson to win in these one-on-one matchups, which is just really, really hard to do consistently in the modern NBA. There's so much athleticism, so much skill, and yeah, it's just a lot of pressure on one guy. And the Hawks did a great job of putting that pressure on Brunson and forcing him to do something that is just frankly going to be really hard to do.
100%. And I just realized when I was talking earlier through the clips, I didn't have that screen saved. So what you were watching in the background right there was just some of the missed shots that Brunson had last night. And you'll notice again that consistent and constant theme that you're mentioning, where these are tough pull up off the dribble shots that are still heavily contested by Dyson. Like he basically high fives him here, nearly gets a hand on the ball. And this was a consistent theme. Like we talked a little bit about the collapsing here. The Hawks are showing a huge presence in the paint. They're making it tough, making his pickup points earlier as well. Like as a guard at 6'1", you don't want to pick up the ball this early, especially with these many people in the paint. And so it kind of just throws off his angles just a little bit. And then of course, there was a lot of physicality, I think, by both of us. By the time it got to the third quarter and then like the middle of the fourth quarter, it was just straight shenanigans. It's kind of like up and down prison ball, bodies flying everywhere, missed shots. And I'll have a question about that in general, but I thought, the Hawks just fought, man. Like they really fought. And I think Dyson is incredibly strong too. Like Jalen Brunson is of course 6'1", but he's very stout. So like a lot of guys are flying back on this bump, but Dyson's able to absorb it, throws off his timing a little bit, and Brunson smokes a layup. And it's Hawks.
This is the third clip that you're showing, the one you're showing now, where the first two are from the strong corner and this is from the weak corner. Brunson's just got to anticipate these stunts and make the passes earlier. Yep. Like I'm not taking away credit from the Hawks, but like that pass to the corner is one Luka Doncic makes every time. He just whips the pass to the corner, like right there, right on that pause, right when he noticed DeAndre Hunter's. Is that Hunter or is that Capella? I'm sorry, it's really far away.
Yeah, it's Hunter.
Okay, yeah, Jesus. Yeah. Right when he notices DeAndre Hunter leaning towards the paint, he anticipates that pre-stunt. You get a one-hand whip pass to the corner in open three. That will not be allowed if you're playing Luka Doncic or even like Devin Booker. And some of it is size limitations, but some of it is just Brunson, man. Like he's got to get better at this aspect of basketball because, yeah, it's just, I'm not going to say it's unacceptable, but like you're letting defenses not only stick. I mean, there's nothing you can do about a defense having a guy like Dyson Daniels, but if they have Dyson Daniels and they're able to like send this help and you're not punishing it, you're not going to score more than 100 points in a game. This defense is going to eat you alive.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think the reason the Hawks play this defense is because they know Brunson is not going to consistently make this pass. There's a couple examples of this. I believe it is this step back. Actually, I think it was the earlier clip I showed too was the same instance where they're collapsing, they're helping off the corner, and they're trusting that Brunson isn't going to either see that pass or make that pass because he's not confident that's going to be able to get through. And so I wanted to ask too,
and that one earlier was from the strong corner too. It's like it's one pass away, and if they're willing,
right.
that's like disrespectful, honestly. Like that's if they're saying like nobody is helping off Trae Young one pass away. No one is saying to Trae Young like, hey man, here's this pass in the corner. We don't think you're going to see it. It's like, no, he's going to see it. They're saying to Jalen Brunson, like, we don't think you're going to see this pass. It's right there. Mikal Bridges is right there. And the Bogdan, like it should be a Kongwu waiting for Brunson in the paint right there. Bogdanovich thinking it's okay to just leave Mikal Bridges wide open in the corner is insane. Like that is that's Brunson. That's where he needs to improve, frankly.
Yeah. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about the whole like getting Brunson off ball. The Knicks were insistent on attacking Dyson on ball. We looked at a couple of clips about why that probably isn't the best option. What do you think is the biggest contributing factor for this insistence to using Brunson on the ball? Is it a stubbornness, like a lack of trust in Mikal and maybe even Josh Hart on the ball? Or how much of this is just like attributed to Mikal and OG's creation limitations versus Tibbs' lack of creativity?
With OG, it's a physical limitation. With Mikal and Josh Hart, it's just stubbornness. He just wants the ball in Brunson's hands. Tibbs is all about outcomes that he can control. That's what he's always been about, for better or for worse. There's a lot of good that comes with that. I think he's an elite floor raiser. I think if you give Tibbs a basketball team, whatever basketball team that is, he's going to get a very high benchmark of quality from whatever team that is. I mean, the team that the Hawks beat in the first round in 2021 was Julius Randle and like not much. You know, that was right. Yeah. Elfrid Payton, and I mean Reggie Bullock had a nice season. RJ Barrett had a super positive outlier shooting season from three that year, but you know, it was a ton of either bad players or role players, and then Julius Randle, who had. It's not like Julius Randle had been much before that. That was his first real breakout season. Thibodeau did that. But like even that season, if you point to that, like that's a prime example of a Tom Thibodeau season. He got 41 wins out of a team whose over-under to start the season was 21.5. And at the end of the season, you were like, well, okay, you can't just assume the production, but why the hell was Elfrid Payton still starting by the end of the season? Like every single data point said that he was an unplayable player. But Tibbs remained stubborn because Tibbs has the things he likes. That's a perfect encapsulation of who Tibbs is as a coach. He just has these things he likes. He has these sticking points. He likes outcomes that he can control. And he feels very confident that the game will look how he wants it to look when the ball is in Jalen Brunson's hands the most of the time. I don't think he's necessarily wrong for thinking that. The game is definitely going to look it's not like Brunson's going to go off the ledge and do crazy things. He's very, very predictable. Low turnover percentage. He's one of the most efficient players with the ball in his hands. So I'm not sitting here saying Tibbs is wrong to think that, but that doesn't mean you can't have a plan B when an opponent has a Dyson Daniels taking away your plan A. And this has been my problem all along with the Knicks. This has been my number one worry about the Knicks and Tibbs as a coach. I've been saying it for 3 years now because the Knicks, you know, Knicks fans thought that they had a really good chance in 2022, 2023 when the Heat made the finals. That was a really good Knicks team. They won 10 games in a row in March, quickly went nuts in Boston. That team was really good. And I said to all Knicks fans, I was like, what do the Knicks do when they can't take a punch? Or what do they do when the opponent has an answer for what they're trying to do well? Because they haven't shown all season. Tibbs wants to play the same way all season. They haven't shown a plan B all season. And then all the injuries happen in the playoffs. You know, quickly goes down. Randall's hurt. Everyone gets hurt. And it's, we'll get him next season. And then same thing happens next season. And it's just, you got to have multiple options. You need schematic versatility. That is the most important thing in the modern NBA. If you cannot win multiple ways, teams are too smart now. Teams are too prepared. Scouting reports are too good. There are too many good players. I would be shocked, genuinely shocked. And as a Knicks fan, I'd be happy to eat all the crow that I have to. But I would be genuinely shocked if the Knicks win 4 playoff series just basically spamming high pick and rolls with Jalen Brunson and doing nothing else. That would legitimately shock me.
Yeah, I think Hawks fans are all too familiar with that lack of schematic versatility and just throwing the same offensive sets out there. We had to suffer through Nate McMillan, who was a great vibes guy, great players coach, but schematically, he was dramatically outclassed anytime we played any competent team. And so a lot of that was spamming pick and rolls, putting a lot of pressure on Trey to create everything. And eventually, while we flamed out in that really bad playoff loss against Miami, just because there wasn't enough supporting architecture. But then, of course, like the scheme was just really exploitable. And I thought that Mikal was able to find success pretty early, especially when, and this is again like a better look in terms of floor balance, where when Cat's at the top of the key, whatever center's on the floor has to respect him because he's that dangerous of a three-point shooter. And so these back cuts become so much more dangerous when it's Mikal Bridges versus Trae Young and Clint Capella is at the top of the floor. So I thought with the way the game started that was going to be something that the Hawks would have to adjust against just because of how much pressure or how much like sort of gravity that Cat has as a player, because it pulls the centers out the paint and it takes away the ability for the Hawks to help against cuts or even just post ups against Trae with their biggest player on the floor. And again, like I think Mikal in a lot of ways is a flawed offensive player, especially if you're asking him to be an initiator. But I thought he did a really good job finishing plays, especially at the beginning of the game. No one puts a body on him here because Bogut can be a little bit spacey. And this is also what I'm talking about too. Like, just look how early Bogdanovich is helping over. Like, and to your point, they're doing this because they don't think Brunson will make this pass, but this is also like an intentional thing from the Hawks where they're trying to cut off the paint and meet the roller early. And they're willing to bet that they can recover back out to Mikal early enough if this pass does get swung. But this pass wasn't getting swung. So I thought, just in general, I was kind of impressed with the way that Mikal started the game. Seemed like they went away from it. I think this is like the most you'll see him sort of like initiate offense, like out of a set. Like he may be the passer, but he's not, typically generating the actual offense. Is just more so like a routine pass. But I thought that here he comes off the pick and roll, finds Josh Hart, and then, makes a nice little move. Nothing super fancy, but I thought he had pretty good flashes offensively using the fact that Trae was guarding him. And then I do think Trae, of course, competed though as well. Like here, Trae gets a hand on the ball, fumbles it a little bit, and it throws off his timing, and then it gives Capella time to get back into the play. So I thought Trae's competitiveness made it a little bit different, but that doesn't mean you don't go to the 6'8" guy who's being guarded by Trae Young. Like the defense has to show help from there. That's how if it's not going to come from Brunson's penetration, they can come from pushing it towards Mikal and forcing the Hawks to show help and then moving the ball around quickly from that point on. So I definitely agree with a lot of the Tibbs points there. But I want to ask in general, do you think the Knicks have a size problem? So the Hawks are plus 12. They were plus 12 in the paint. They killed them in the paint in the first matchup, plus 9 on the glass. And then the Hawks also grabbed 40% of their misses. So they had a 40.6 offensive rebound percentage. I think Cat in particular, like he's more active contesting at the rim or just in general. At any point over the last 4 seasons, he's averaging 22.6 contests per 100 and 8.3 rim contests. But opponents are shooting 6.4% better at the rim than they typically do when he's the primary defender at the rim. And I thought particularly in the first half, he got to a lot of shots. He was being very physical, got away with a little bit of things. But I thought in general, I was very impressed with the way that he was protecting the rim. But then from that point on, I still thought the Hawks were getting to the paint too easily. And then he just sort of like lost any sort of resistance that he had. So really a two-parter. Do you think that Cat is, we know that Cat is, of course, maximized at the 5, but how big of a sort of a curveball, to your point, like schematic versatility, is having Mitchell Robinson at the 5? And do you think that, is that going to be more so of a matchup dependent thing where if they need to be bigger, they're going to start Mitch? Or do you think that when he's back and he's fully healthy, the best version of the starting lineup will include a traditional center next to Cat.
No, I think that even when Mitch comes back, it has to be small spurts thing, like
Mm,
games like this one where the Knicks have a distinct size advantage, but still bring Mitch off the bench and play them together a couple minutes a half. I think when you trade for Towns, you're trading for him to maximize the offensive ceiling, which is at center. And look, I would argue that so far this season, the Knicks have not gotten what they expected defensively from any of Bridges, Hart, or Anunoby for differing reasons. OG's been really good, but he hasn't been like the all-world defender he was the last couple seasons. And I think a
right.
big part of that is him adapting to this new role where he's pretty much like the team's Band-Aid. Like any mistake, he is asked to patch it up. I think Hart and Bridges have had their own struggles, more so Bridges than Hart, I would argue. But the data is kind of indifferent to both of them, especially indifferent to Bridges. Bridges has been awful at the point of attack, like I talked about earlier. So, and I'm saying all this because they've still had like the league 17th best defense, which
Mm,
is fine. Like, I think you can win an NBA championship if you have one of the 2 or 3 best offenses and a league average defense. I don't think that's a crazy thing. So I personally don't think they need to put Mitchell Robinson in the starting lineup because I think the trade-off will be hugely negative for them.
mm,
As far as your first question goes about overall size, I think that's a really interesting question, or it brings up a really interesting discussion because, yes, they clearly have size issues. But to me, nothing is ever going to be perfect. So the question you always have to ask yourself whenever a team has a deficiency is, what are they gaining because of this deficiency? And is the overall trade-off worth it? So in this case, I would argue that the Knicks have an elite offense specifically because of the players in their starting lineup, and add Deuce McBride to that. I think you could put Deuce McBride in the starting lineup for McCall or Hart and things would stay the same. That team is unquestionably small, but they are, and I'm not saying their offense is elite because they're small, but
mm.
but like it or not, these players are the driving factor of this elite offense. So if they are driving this really good offense, it's a trade-off you live with if sometimes there are teams that are going to bludgeon them on the offensive glass. You have to bet that in the long term, the overall trade-off will be a positive. If you don't think that's a positive, you shouldn't have made these trades. Like,
Right.
at the end of the day, you made these trades. You traded for Towns, you traded for Bridges. You can't be like, oh shit, actually this is too small. We're going to go in an entirely different direction. You should have kept the team you had the last couple seasons that was clearly bigger and was dominant on the glass and was trying to win a different way. They went down this path. I personally don't have an issue with the size. I think there have been plenty of positive trade-offs from it.
Mm. Yeah, and like we said earlier, this is still the best offense in the NBA. And in a lot of ways, they've also had the highest proportion of their games where they're leading by 20 plus. So when this offense is clicking, they are generally unstoppable. And that's because they have so much versatility in terms of where like you're putting out 5 guys who are shooting like high percentages from 3 on decent volume. And of course, you're running a 5-out offense for really the first time in New York in a minute. So I think all those points are definitely um, things that I think like they make sense to me. I still do think that there's just a lack of resistance in general with Cat on the floor. And like they are asking a ton of OG, like a ton, as a weak side rim protector, as a guy who's going to guard the best player on the floor. And it's also why like Mikal, like if you look at the starting lineup, I don't think Mikal, like ideally it'd be OG, right? But you can't do that. He can't be guarding Trey and cover up all the other issues that the Knicks have defensively. It just felt to me like, especially in these in between areas, Cat wasn't much of a factor. Now, of course, by the time Trey catches it, it's going up. Like I'm not expecting him to block this or anything like that. But in general, I thought as soon as the roller got behind him, it was going to be automatically points for the Hawks. He just doesn't have great positioning in these spots, and he doesn't have the verticality to break up these passes over the top. And then his recovery in general, I thought left a little bit to be desired. But a lot of these in between floaters, there just wasn't much of a presence defensively within the paint. You could see OG trying to do the best he can. First he's here trying to battle with Clint Capella, gets up, then he flies back into the play. Now he's containing Jalen Johnson, and then now he's trying to guard Dyson Daniels as well because the way the Knicks rotated here, they kind of left him alone. So I thought, I do think that the paint will be a little bit of an issue against certain teams, but like that's the point of having Mitch. Like it's a curveball. It's not like something you're going to rely on against most teams because most teams aren't going to be this equipped to sort of expose Cat at the 5, especially if you do have, and hopefully like you get a little bit more from Mikal and then maybe you shake it up at certain moments. But I think that the Hawks are kind of uniquely poised to sort of take advantage of this, especially when they go to things like double drag. I thought they were great Gortat screens. They did whatever they could to get Trey open around the rim, and he took advantage of stuff like that.
Yeah, the Knicks are really liable to get punished by Gortat screens. Teams have been doing it to them for weeks now. It's wild. I agree with you about the Hawks being uniquely equipped to exploit some of these deficiencies too. Like, Trae Young is an elite offensive engine, and then they just have surrounded him. Even if they haven't surrounded him with the most shooting, they have a ton of size, which is, to your point, one of the Knicks' weaknesses. Again, it's just about man, he's on the screen now. Deuce McBride should have been guarding Trae Young more. I'm not saying Deuce could have stopped Trae Young, but definitely wouldn't have been getting dusted at the point of the attack the way Mikal Bridges was, and just letting him just go into the paint. Again, though, regarding the size and in my opinion, it's just if you have these matchups where a team is, capitalizing or exploiting a weakness that you have, this is why you have the league's best offense. This is about the trade-offs. You don't say, oh, we need to get better on defense to stop this from happening. You say, we'll just outscore them on the other end. And the Knicks had an avenue to doing that. They just needed to involve Trae Young in the action a little bit more at the point of attack and create advantages that way. And they just weren't willing to do it. So I think this game was way more about the scheme than it was about the size deficiency. And I'm not arguing or disagreeing with you, the Hawks absolutely exploited the size deficiency. 22 offensive rebounds is very loud. All I'm saying is that the Knicks could have won in spite of that, and their scheme was bad, and the Hawks took advantage of that. The Hawks were by far the deserving winners.
For sure, yeah. I definitely agree with a lot of that. And I think it's interesting too, just in general, because I thought the Hawks have been doing a lot better at sort of insulating Trae from those situations where it's like an ISO thing or, guys are trying to take advantage of him. But at the end of the day, if you have to show help on someone, that's going to create like better offense for a team. So I thought I was really intrigued by like just their lack of sort of tapping into that sort of overall like sort of Achilles heel with the Hawks defense. And I think you've talked a lot like about just in this episode or in general that this Knicks team is different from like a traditional Knicks team. This isn't in some ways, yes, they still have like the lunch pail, like blue collar stuff, like obviously like Josh Hart guys like that who can mix it up. But this is an offensively lean team, 100%. And so I'm curious, like, how has the experience been watching a team that leans a little bit more into that run and gun approach, instead that like towards beating teams with their offense? And which style do you prefer, considering that traditionally like the Knicks have never really played this type of basketball?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm older, but I don't really remember the 90s Knicks. I don't have this nostalgia for, the Ewing, the blood in the garden Knicks. I hugely prefer the style of offense that the Knicks are playing now. I don't think they necessarily lack toughness. I just think they're not as reliant on it as they have been the past couple of years. It's not their defining characteristic. But more than anything, I just want to see the Knicks win a championship as a fan. And I think that this team, the optimized version of this team, which is theoretical at this point, I think this is the closest the Knicks have come to building a championship team since the early 90s. And it's just on the coaching staff and the players to try to reach that. And they're really far from it right now. It definitely doesn't look that way now, but I do think it's still there. I do believe in this 5-out, all the space they're creating. They're going to get the best of Brunson, hopefully. Bridges can play better. Hart can't play any better. He's been spectacular. I don't know if he's going to keep shooting 40% from three.
Right,
You know,
yeah.
if I say it about Risache, I have to be fair and say it about a Knicks player. If Josh Hart just shoots 40% from three across the whole season, then good for him for practicing this offseason, I guess. Yeah, I just prefer the style that gives the Knicks the best chance of reaching that ultimate goal. And I think that this style is what gives it to them, to be clear.
Yeah, this is definitely an offensive era, and I think in general there's sort of an effectiveness threshold, I think, with defense, just with how good NBA offenses are. Like, you only do so much defensively. So I think you don't have to necessarily be the best defense in the league. That is, of course, is an asset. But if you're this dominating offensively, then to your point, you need to be around league average, and then you can survive. And I also asked that question because the Hawks have never really been that team that can grit games out or like really hangs their sort of like their hat on their defense. But they've won multiple games against three of the best teams in the NBA, like the Knicks, the Cavs, the Celtics, particularly in the conference. And they've done it on the defensive end, like holding teams to their worst offensive performance. And it's sort of an invigorating feeling for, like, as a Hawks fan, because we don't see this. Like, this isn't just an abnormal thing like the Trae Young era. Like, we've never been a defensively minded culture in general. And so I think the point that you made a little bit earlier, where you were saying here's one way we want to play, and that's the only way we're going to play. And if teams do something to take that away from us, then we can't really do anything. The Hawks have, because they've always leaned into this super Trae Young heavy attack, that when teams do focus in on that, especially when Nate McMillan was on the roster, we didn't have an answer. Not just because we couldn't get to a different offensive flow, but we couldn't turn to our defense to then get us back into the game. And I think it's been just a incredibly different experience as a Hawks fan, because, again, like, we've never really had that. And so I do want to ask you a question as well. Like, is there any aspect of you where you enjoy Trae Young's villainy, or is it just irritating as a Knicks fan?
I have to be honest. I'm the wrong person for this. I'm basically like a bot, and I'm a fan. I have nostalgia. That shit doesn't bother me. I don't care. I think it's cool that it brings excitement to the games. I thought, did you watch the Rockets Warriors game last night too?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, I thought both games were like really intense, really physical. Obviously, I thought that last call that Kuminga got called on was nonsense, but for the most part, I thought it was just two playoff atmosphere like games with high intensity, and I, more than anything, love that feeling. I think Trae Young brings that. I think he brings that to Knicks Hawks games, and if it takes him being like a little bit needly, a little bit of a showman to do it, I'm not going to say I appreciate him. Like, I don't think it should be expected of me as a Knicks fan to like appreciate him for it, but I do, in an objective sense, just appreciate getting to watch these really high stakes games, these games that feel more important than maybe they actually are. And he's a big part of that. So no, I don't share the disdain for him or whatever. I'm, more than anything, I'm an NBA. I love the NBA, and I'm a basketball purist. And the thing I see when I watch Trae Young is one of the most gifted passers we've ever seen. I wish I cringe internally every time he takes one of those 30-footers. Like, I don't understand why that's such a big part of his game, just because it's like, dude, you would be so much more efficient if you just took the shots you're actually good at. But whatever, that it's part of the package, and his passing is just so good. I want to, my co-host XJ read the data when in our most recent episode of Hot Hand Theory, and I want to read it for your fan base, just so you can just sort of fully appreciate how good a passer that Trae Young is. I'm sorry, I'm sort of filibustering here as I try to find the data. Here it is. So here's Trae Young's passing splits per B-ball index. Passing versatility, he's in the 93rd percentile. Passing creation volume, 100th percentile. Passing creation quality, 99th percentile. Just think about how crazy that is. He has the highest volume of passes of pass creation in the entire NBA, leads the NBA in assist percentage, and yet the shots his teammates are shooting are in the 99th percentile. That's like being the Steph Curry of passing. That's like shooting the most threes and also being the most accurate three-point shooter. That doesn't make any sense. And then he's 99.8th percentile in lob creation. He's good at every type of pass, whips them to both corners. He can he just sets up lobs all the time. This is his gift, and he's remarkable at it. So to me, that's what I see when I see Trae Young.
Yeah, I think the Hawks are also first in shot quality. And that's a jump from last season where I think they were 10th or 11th. And that's what happens when you put the ball in Trae's hands and he's empowered as a playmaker. You put length and versatility around him. And I think all those stats you listed off, like he's always been among the league leaders in that aspect, but now he has a little bit more usage to soak up. And I think, of course, like more looks that you see, the even better you get as a passer. He's only gotten better with time. Increases assists per game average every single season. Has a good chance to finish with a 20-12 season, which would be phenomenal. And just in general, I think storylines are what make that add intensity to these games. Like Warriors Rockets does not have that feel if the Rockets haven't won a game against them since 2020. And so there's a different intensity to that game. There's almost hatred. There's definitely hatred between those two fan bases. But within those teams themselves, where you can see like Tari Eason, Amin Thompson, those young guys, they're fired up for the opportunity to try and take that win away from an older team in Golden State that's talked a lot of mess about them. That they have their sort of history, and it's the same thing with the Hawks and the Knicks. Like, of course, the playoff series is long gone. That's a completely different Hawks team, completely different Knicks team, but there's still remnants from that within the fan bases, within the arenas, within the culture, with just the different sort of emotions you feel watching a game like that. And I didn't sit down the whole third quarter, really the fourth quarter either, just because I was into the game. Like I'm watching my Hawks fight back, and there's something special about like tapping into the history between the team for matchups like these. So I definitely really, really appreciated watching the game. And for me personally, like the biggest, because I wouldn't even say Trae Young has terrorized the Knicks, outside of just that playoff matchup. Like it hasn't been like any sort of dominance like a LeBron or anything like that. But like, on the biggest stages, he has showed up 100% in the Garden. For me as a kid, that was LeBron. Like LeBron would consistently destroy the Hawks in the playoffs, and it was almost in like a big brother, little brother way. Like we would have a phenomenal season, number one seed, then LeBron just comes in and takes us over. And for a long time, I couldn't appreciate how his brilliance, because I was just so frustrated at what he was doing to my team. But like as I've gotten older, then it's like, well, yes, this guy is absolutely crushing us, but at the same time, like from a basketball fan perspective, this is just great hoops. And it's just like, yes, I'm upset that we're losing, but at the same time, it's just like I can appreciate the greatness in front of me. It's always better when it comes with a win. But I think it's like I just love when people are able to view basketball in an objective sense. Even, obviously Trae can be irritating. I can definitely see that. Like as from a non-Hawks fan perspective, like there's things he does that are disrespectful, 100%. But I think he kind of responds to the energy he's given. Like Knicks fans start chanting as Trae Young, he's gonna drop 12 points and 2 assists within 2 minutes. Like that's just kind of like he relishes, he loves those opportunities. Like, and I think it is to the point where I wonder if fans feel a little bit of hesitancy to talk mess to him, because I do think it's sort of like a trigger for him. But it's all part of the game, and I absolutely just love this matchup in particular. Even if I do think sometimes fans on both sides drag it out, like this isn't a rivalry, this isn't anything like that. But there's a little bit extra to the games, and that's okay. And that's what the NBA should be looking for. And I think like this is basketball at its best, when teams kind of have just a twinge of, I need a little bit extra tonight because we're playing these guys. So I just want to ask you one last question.
Can I just want to comment on what you just said. I just want to so the Trae Young thing for me as a Knicks fan, with what you just said, I absolutely empathize with Knicks fans who are annoyed by the extracurricular things he does, like when he's chirping at the fans. Like I get that. That I can at least wrap my head around that. The thing I don't get, and this is a me problem, I'm not lashing out at other Knicks fans. The thing I don't get is when people get mad at Trae Young for the foul baiting antics, but then defend Jalen Brunson. That's the thing I will never be able to wrap my head around. I don't get how you can watch 82 Knicks games a year and not just plainly see that Jalen Brunson is like the master of his craft and is actively trying to use his craft to draw fouls. Like I don't understand. Like he is praised for that because he's so skilled, and then Trae Young does the same thing, and he's trying to draw contact, and he's stopping on a dime and getting someone to run into his back. It's the same thing to me. I don't understand. I do not understand that level of being so invested that you just can't see the hypocrisy. That's frustrating to me. You also talked about LeBron against the Hawks, and I assume you're younger, so I assume you meant 2015 and 2016. those 2 seasons. If you ever get the chance, go rewatch Game 3 of the 2009 Eastern Conference semifinals. Hawks, Cavs. That is the best LeBron James performance that nobody knows about. Nobody knows about it. There's nobody who talks about it ever. He comes back, so he starts the game just ridiculous. It's Hubie Brown on the call. It's Mike Tirico and Hubie Brown on the call, and LeBron comes out of the gate just absolutely ridiculous. Has a couple of these like peak LeBron dunks in the half court, and then he comes back into the game after sitting for like 2 minutes, and the Hawks are like up 7. They went from down 8 to up 7 because that LeBron team was just all LeBron, and he hits like 4 straight threes that just I think his final line was like 44, 15 and 9 or something like that. And it was like a road game in Atlanta. It's just one of the most remarkable performances you'll ever see. And it was in Atlanta, and the announcers are like laughing at the end, like just at how good it is. It's anybody out there who's interested in just watching a LeBron performance that nobody knows about. 2009 Eastern Conference semifinals, Game 3. It's just ridiculous to see. And it's related to the Hawks. So.
Sure. I think I have like slight memories from watching some highlights from that game. So definitely check it out. I've got to run. So unfortunately, we got to cut it right here. But I want to say I appreciate you so much again for taking the time. One of my favorite parts about playing the Knicks is now being able to talk about it with you. So it's been dope. I really hope that everyone who listened enjoyed the episode. And please, Geoff, let them know where they can find your work, because you and XJ are putting together some really interesting stuff over at Hot Hand Theory.
Yeah, just check out Hot Hand Theory on YouTube if you liked what you heard here. We are Knicks fans, but I mean, the thing I'm most proud of is how we're just branching out across the league. We cover the entire league. Our last 4 episodes now, we've had 4 episodes in a row about the Mavericks, Nuggets, Grizzlies, and Magic. And they are like by far our 4 most popular, acclaimed, whatever word you want to use. All the fans pop in and they're just like, holy shit, like we never get talked about this way. We love the way you guys talk about basketball. We're going to get around to the Hawks. We're going to talk about every team in the NBA. We're going to talk about the biggest stories in the NBA. And we just paint it from it's data driven, it's film driven, and we just talk about macro and micro. If you love the NBA, come check us out.
For sure. Again, thank you all for the work you're doing covering the game. Love people who love basketball. Make sure you guys check them out. They're doing things very similar to how I run my show as well. Please let me know if you guys enjoyed. Leave any comments for us to answer. Make sure you like and subscribe, and add the show on all platforms. And again, thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.